It's time for To The Last Drop podcast with Liam Delcalm and Brendan Nell.
This is To The Last Drop. I'm Liam Delcalm.
And I'm Brendan Nell.
Brendan, the moment has almost arrived. We're a few days out from probably the most eagerly anticipated inbound test series outside of those by the British and Irish Lions for many a year. In fact, I'd probably go as far as to say this has been, in terms of hype and anticipation, the most hyped series since, I think, 1996 when the All Blacks came here. They had Tri-Nations obligations, but they also came here on a 3 or 4 match tour back in 1996. We've obviously had England and France and so on, but nothing quite like the one that is about to unfold.
Yeah, I mean, they've been different. When I'm trying to think 2018 against England, when Russie's first test, Sia becoming captain, there was quite a bit of hype around that, but not sort of the almost personal narrative that this has become. The All Black tests are always big, and they always have their own sort of narrative, and there's always a rivalry there. But outside the All Blacks, I'm trying to think when, other than Alliance Tour, there's been this sort of excitement. And SA Rugby's done their bit as well. I loved it on the other day with the team announcement. Russie went out and he said, we don't use those words of unfinished business to Percy's question. And said, we don't talk about revenge, we don't use the words unfinished business. And 3 hours later, SA Rugby released an advert hyping the series, which was called Unfinished Business. So I found that quite funny. But everybody's done their own sort of way of doing it. And Russie's little comment this week about, as well as I'd rather have 2 World Cups in the British and Irish Lions series victory than worry about the 3 losses against Ireland. They're chomping at the bit. They want to win this one. Ireland have got a point to prove. So there's lots riding on this game. Yeah,
but if we get a winner, if one of the teams win 2-0 and it's there's no tie in this series, does that settle any of the arguments that we've been having over the last, I don't know how many years? I mean, this rivalry has obviously developed over the last decade, let's say the last decade. Does it sort of give you a definitive answer to some of the questions we've been asking the last few years?
I don't think so. I think there'll be a lot of soul searching for whoever loses on either side, and I think that rivalry is just developing more. Now, what we're seeing is probably a rivalry that with the URC element in it is just going to get bigger. And so instead of settling matters, we'll probably just go to the next one. Now, of course, I mean, I just think of, it's going to sound strange to compare it because it's not in the same league. But, Jake White lost 6 times to John Dobson, the Stormers, in the URC, and we spoke about that rivalry. And when the Bulls won the 7th clash, or the 8th clash, or whichever it was, it hasn't really settled it. It's just sort of brought it forward towards the next clash. And this will probably do the same. We'll probably, they don't play each other very often. They've only played, three times in the last 50-odd years in South Africa. So all the games tend to be in Dublin. So I think we're just going to see this rivalry developing more and more.
Of course, we delved a bit deeper into this conversation with a couple of guests in the show later on. Maybe you can tell our listeners a little bit more about our guests, because they have distinct opinions, don't they?
Well, I mean, you and I are not known for not having opinions, but we brought 2 of the more assured people into the and guys who definitely know the game well. The one is my colleague at Supersport, Gavin Rich, who's been writing rugby longer than probably us, both of us, to be very honest.
Yeah, I think William Webb Ellis was still sort of eyeing, what the potential is for picking up the ball and what sanctions he might face for doing so when Gavin started.
Yeah, I think he was still writing his columns there then. But yeah, he used to write for the Weekend August and for the Independent Group, and obviously the last 20 odd years he's been at Supersport. So he's been in the game longer than most people. Probably watched Russie play under six rugby as well. No, we're actually being a bit harsh on Gav, but no, he certainly knows the game, and he's a good friend of ours. And he at short notice decided to come on the pod as well. And then the other one is one of the most prominent voices in Irish rugby, former international, and certainly one of the biggest TV pundits in Ireland at the moment, Bernard Jackman, who yeah, has been the one guy you see on social media quite a lot talking about Ireland, and probably one of the most level-headed voices in Ireland when it comes to that, and sort of knows the game and knows not to be too sort of too much of a shrill partisan as we see sometimes in media circles.
Yeah. No, it was certainly a nice chat. We touched on a lot of different elements about the series. Obviously, there's the rivalry, but also the intricacies into what might help shape the outcome of the series.
Yeah, no, let's. I think we've talked enough. Now let's go straight to that chat and have a listen yourself, and you'll see everybody's opinions there. Well, it's a massive week, and obviously we're all looking forward to this huge test. Excitement's building. There's a lot going around on social media and everywhere about this test at Loftus on Saturday. So we thought we'd have a chat about it. So with me today, as always, is Liam. Liam, as you know, is the co-host of this podcast. And then we have two very special guests, Gavin Rich, my partner in crime at Supersport, and also you've been around rugby for a long time, and Bernard Jackman from Ireland. Bernard, welcome. It's good to have an Irish voice on you, so we don't sound too partisan.
No worries. Thanks a million, guys. I was dreading this tour, to be honest. When I saw the Irish provinces kind of peter out of the URC, but Razzie this week and picking the Irish team, the hype video that Saru put out, looking at the quality that the Springboks have picked, it's a mouth-watering test match, particularly the first one. I just can't wait to see how Ireland shape up against this Springbok team, and we could have hopefully two amazing test matches, but I'm a little bit skeptical or a little bit fearful that it could be one-way traffic, but we'll know a lot more on Saturday afternoon.
Since just from my point of view, I mean, I sense that there's a bit of trepidation on both sides. Obviously, from our side, because South Africa hasn't beaten Ireland since 2016, and because I thought probably their best chance was probably at the World Cup anyway, and just seeing the way they didn't take chances during that game. And from Ireland's side, it's just almost this thing about playing in South Africa. I think there was a lot more confidence before Leinster went down to Loftus and lost the Bulls.
Yeah, a lot more confidence. I think that result really, I suppose, put the fear, as Paul Collins used to say, the fear of God into us. It was just a masterclass by Jake White in terms of how to tactically take apart that Leinster defence in particular, which is obviously the Jacques Nienaber defence, and they exposed that space on the edges so well. Willie Leroux obviously being a second playmaker. He was outstanding. The scrum was so impressive. I mean, it was so dominant, and that's probably 4/5 of an Irish front five that played that day. That Bulls front row it's not the Springbok front row. And probably there may be better scrummagers than the Springbok front row, but the Springbok scrum, both what starts and what finishes, is are excellent. And yeah, the Irish players look tired, and there's no reason why we're more tired than you guys. There look to be a mental and a physical fatigue there, and our only hope is that Andy Farrell can get those players into the right place, where they don't look physically tired and mentally they're fresh. And I think hopefully the Box jersey and what's ahead of them, playing the double World Cup winners, playing a team who obviously, want this scalp, playing at a place like Loftus, which is such history, playing at altitude. I mean, if you sleepwalk into an ambush here, there's no excuse. I mean, this is no ambush. We know what's coming, and the Irish players have to step up to it now and match it, or else it could be a hammering. It really could. This game could get out of hand for Ireland if we don't step up massively. Not on what Ireland have done, to be fair, but what these players have been doing over the last 2 or 3 months. They just look off, and it's probably Farrell's biggest test as a manager to get them back ready to compete with Springboks.
When was the last
in a
time?
very ironic sort of way, I mean, do you think the fact that there was no Irish representation in the final of the URC, does that actually help the national cause slightly?
Yeah, maybe you could argue that, like, if Leinster and Munster were in it, there would have been 10 players of the squad, or Leinster more, who had another week. But to be honest, Liam, I think I'd rather have that and have maybe lifted a trophy and the benefit that would have given the team. It was a bit of a shock to the system for Munster to lose at home to Glasgow, and that's no disrespect, but Munster had worked incredibly hard to be a top seed, and to have that home advantage, and to lose your trophy, and go out quite meekly, really. And then obviously Leinster, the Bulls destroyed them. Really, it was incredible, and Leinster would have felt, I think, that they could have, that Leinster team was effectively the Irish team, and they got taught a lesson by the Bulls. And also, like, Leinster had no excuse. I mean, they hadn't lifted the Champions Cup. There was heartbreak. They hadn't won a trophy for a long time. There was no excuse in terms of complacency or over celebrating something else. That URC this year was a must win for Leinster, and they couldn't get it done. So I agree with you. Yeah, potentially a week's rest is good. But I think the benefit of having won a trophy would have outweighed that.
Rev, just to bring you in here, I mean, just from a Springbok point of view, we've been talking offline, you and I, quite a bit about the Boks and their chances this year. Just your thoughts on where the Springboks are going into this game. Obviously, Ireland are the one team in Russie's era that the Springboks haven't beaten, and that's a huge factor this weekend. You're on mute, man.
Like that, yeah. Okay, I was going to try and do it with my hands. Just to actually go into what Bernard was saying now, because he's talking about a potential hammering, and he's talking about it could get ugly. And I don't know when last Ireland actually did lose heavily to anyone. I think, am I right in saying it was probably the All Black test, the first All Black test in the 2022 series? Yeah, and that game, I watched that game, and it was that end score wasn't really a reflection of the game. So I'm not so sure about. I mean, it's almost like we're going back to 1998. I remember covering a tour here in 1998, and I think Warren Gatland was actually the Irish.
Gavin, I was in the squad. That's how old that is. Yeah, I was there. That test match. Oh my God. The Battle of Pretoria, incredible.
Yeah. Okay, that's where I was going. I remember it was a very different sort of Irish sort of scenario there. And I remember you guys still being competitive there. I'm trying to remember some of the names. You had that one loose forward.
Brennan.
You think Trevor Brennan?
Trevor Brennan came on.
Trevor Brennan. Yeah. And the tough guys. And you stayed in. I was actually in George. You guys stayed at the Wilderness in the hotel next to the freeway there. We were there for a week.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about
that was an unbelievable tour. But like, that was an old-fashioned tour. So we played Boland, we played the Grikas. We were in Kimberley, Western Province. It was just brilliant. We were there for 6 weeks and saw parts of South Africa that I haven't got back to, but it was unfortunately. But yeah, brilliant, really good.
I remember that you played against Western Province, and I think you drew 9. I think it was about 9. And Alan Solomons was the Western Province coach then, and he thought that you guys were trying to slow the game too much up. And this quote afterwards that Ireland slowed the game up so much that they took so many breaks that they should be sponsored by Kit Kat, because in those days there was that advert, take a break, have a Kit Kat. Yeah, but back to you, Brendan. Yeah, we have spoken about it quite a bit. I think that South African rugby is in a good space at the moment. Obviously, I mean, having won 2 World Cups, and but there are questions. I mean, obviously there are questions. I mean, there are guys that in the old days when most of the Springbok team came out of Super Rugby, we knew the form that the players were in. But I personally haven't seen Andre Pollard play for a while now because I haven't really had time to watch much English club rugby. I haven't seen Sia play other than reading what his club president said about him. So there are questions. I mean, for me, it's just going to be great to actually see these two teams match up. Obviously, at altitude, I'd always make the Springboks favourites. I think that from an Irish national perspective, maybe they've missed a beat by Leinster not sending their full strength teams out here. So. Because obviously, I mean, we know that Glasgow were quite well primed for altitude by Franco Smith, and they were able to play the altitude in that final. Whereas, and everybody's got this perception that when you play at altitude, it's all about the visiting team. The disadvantages that the visiting team falls away at the end, but it's not really. Like speaking to some of the coastal coaches from this country who go up there and have success, they talk about managing the game, and that the first 20 minutes can be as difficult, especially if it's a high tempo game. So altitude must be an advantage for the Boks, but I just think that the fact that Leinster did come here and did get beaten might actually be a learning experience for them as well. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that that's happened in rugby, that they can turn it around and they can absorb the lesson. So it's going to be very intriguing. I would say that I would predict that Springboks will win the series, but I certainly wouldn't go as far as Bernard went and say that it's going to be ugly. I just don't know when last it has been ugly for an Irish team. You do have a different defensive system as well to the Leinster one.
Yeah.
At national level.
Yeah, no. Look at it. I think this is a good Irish team, and they have been very consistent. But again, this year in the Six Nations, like we should have had a Grand Slam. You would have thought this year. We beat France away in the first game after the World Cup, and they looked to be a team who still had a bit of a hangover from the World Cup. But we found our stride really quickly. Life without Johnny Sexton started off brilliantly, but then we came unstuck against an English team in Twickenham, who kind of had some similar attributes to South Africa in terms of they had that physicality that we've always struggled with. And if you think about how Ireland play and how Andy Farrell changed Irish rugby, so Joe Schmidt got Ireland to number one in the world with a kind of a very pragmatic game plan, and we came unstuck against teams who could match us physically. Farrell tried to change that, so we played with a lot of high tempo. It's ironic, Ireland will be the ones giving out about teams taking a break now because they back their fitness and they want to play fast. But my fear is just a little bit that this tour is the wrong tour for this year for us. We haven't found new players. I know you guys have picked a very experienced team with only 2 players under 30. But I still think that team that Razzie has picked is by and large the best team and the best players. Whereas, if Razzie's selection is correct, which I don't, the mock selection that he put up last week, I think that's probably going to be very close to the Irish team. I think the weakness or the frustration I have is that we haven't had enough players who stepped up in the URC or the Champions Cup this year in Ireland to pressurise the Tyke Furlongs, the Andrew Porters, or not even just those. Some of the bench players, Cian Healy be the sub loose head. He hasn't played a huge amount this year. He's on the bench for Leinster, but we haven't had enough players stepping up. And I think our model is potentially wrong in that to play for Ireland, you have to play in Ireland. And I know that gives us a lot of alignment, a word Razzie uses a lot, and it's easy to control those players. But it also means that competition-wise, I mean, if you have a foreign player in your spot in one province, then you only have 3 to pick from, really. And no one leaves the Irish system. People can tend to stay there. Even it's one thing having the international stay there, but it's that kind of just journeyman pro who stay as well now. And that stops some of the youngsters coming through. So we have a new high performance director who started a month ago, a fellow called David Humphreys, who would have been on that tour actually in '98. And he's a big job trying to work out how we can get past World Cup quarterfinals, to be honest, and what we need to do in terms of changing Irish rugby to be able to compete with the Springboks or the All Blacks. Sorry, not
Bernard,
compete, but to be able to beat them. Yeah.
Sorry, Bernard. From an Irish perspective, would you say that this series is it one where you kind of hope the Boks get drawn into a battle of wits against Ireland, as opposed to some of the, I suppose, more traditional strengths?
Yeah, I think that. Well, look, I think if you're Andy Farrell and you're looking at why Ireland potentially can win, right, and that's every coach does that on a Monday, Tuesday. He's trying to sell the belief in his players. He's going to look at the potential fact that South Africa maybe are changing how they play in terms of a new attack coach. So Tony Brown is one of the world's best attack coaches. But it might take a little while to get that balance right between what has been a team who's been set up around an unbelievable set piece, a brilliant kicking game, a great defence, and an attack that between Japan and France did evolve. But nothing like Tony Brown teams, the Tony Brown coach sides have had a certain DNA which is different than everyone else. I mean, it's been a phenomenally intricate attacking system. So if he's trying to implement that, will there be a bedding in period? Will there be a transitionary period where maybe there's going to be mistakes and errors? And Ireland will have to hope so. Ireland will have to hope that South Africa, I think, are trying to evolve and are going to take more risks, and that may open up opportunities for Ireland. And then defensively as well, I mean, like the Jacques Nienaber defence, Ireland had the best attack in the world, we would have said, going into the World Cup. But in that group game, I mean, we got limited to so few chances, and we were blessed to win it. So, but then Jerry Flannery, who I know really well, I think is a brilliant coach, he's just come in there. It may take him a little bit of time to really get his message across. Now, I don't think he's going to change as much as the attack will change, but there are two areas, I think, Liam, that the Irish coaches will be saying, look, there's potential weaknesses there that we haven't seen yet. The Wales game wasn't enough of it was just one match, and you could see slight changes, but we have to hope that South Africa are a little bit in transition. So even if you look at Leinster this year, Leinster changed their focus from being an attacking team to being a defensive team, and their defence improved, but their attack really disimproved, and that can take time, and it wasn't easy. Jack obviously only came in after the World Cup, and maybe they got that balance wrong of attack and defence. But I suppose Ireland would be hoping that South Africa are changing how they play a little bit, and that will make them more beatable, if you get me.
There's precedent in what you're saying as well, because in Russie's first test in 2000, his first test was actually against Wales, but his first proper test was actually at Ellis Park against England, and obviously the Jacques defensive system was new then, and England, if I remember correctly, went into about a 20-point lead very quickly. And that because the South Africans weren't used to defending so high, and they exploited that. Unfortunately for England, South Africa was still able to come back. Maybe that as well. It didn't work.
Yeah, Gavin, I spoke to Jacques about that because I interviewed him for a business event in Ireland, and he said, as he was coming off the pitch at half time, some of the senior players were saying to him, "Jacques, we need to change this. We need to go back to being a little bit softer." And he's there, no, we go harder and higher. And trust me, it'll work. Now, he didn't know the second half was going to unfold. He thought maybe we were going to have to lose a few to get what he wants. But you're right, Jed, they came back. But he only sees one way. And in fairness to Razzie, I think the best thing about Razzie is, and speaking to coaches or players who worked with him in Munster, is he has real belief and conviction in what he wants to do. And that transmits to the players. So they believe in it as well, and I think that as a player, you want that. You want that clarity of thought and consistency, and it's a big part of why the Boks are so good, and it's a big part of why they win close matches. And I think the reason I think you guys feel, maybe not you, but South African fans feel they're not as respected as they should be around the world, is you probably aren't as impressive on the eye as the great All Black teams, who go and put 40 on you. You guys can kill a team winning 16-14, and it's a great strength to have. But I think that's probably why, the All Blacks under Carter, etc., maybe had more fans globally because they were a little bit more capable of hammering teams.
Yeah, that also cues what you were saying. Or you asked me the question, Brennan, about what I thought was going to happen and why. We're talking about close games, and the last 2 games between South Africa and Ireland have been very close, and they've been decided basically because South Africa, well, they didn't take the opportunities, but they also kicked a shower when it came to goal kicking. This is actually the first time that Andre Pollard's playing against Ireland. Certainly, I'm not sure if he played in that 2017 game. I don't think that he's played against Ireland before because he wasn't part of Alistair Coetzee squad in 2016. He was injured, and he was luck. I mean, it goes without saying that he's a much more reliable goal kicker than Marnie was, and Damien Willemse was kicking in Dublin. You remember they went through. I think they went around the team to get a kicker in Dublin in that game, and they lost there too. I mean, Ireland were probably the better team in Dublin, but I mean, it was a very close game, and if South Africa had slotted their goals, they probably would have won that game. So there is that. Andre kicking on the half-felt, kicking from long range. I think that's a big factor in South Africans' favour in comparison to where they were in the 2 previous games against Ireland, where their goal kicking wasn't that reliable.
Let me remind you quickly, Gavin. Elton Yankees was fly off in 2017 in that 38. What was it, 38-3 or something?
That horrible game.
Shocker.
Yeah, listen. I mean, Gavin, I agree with you. I mean, I was going to make that point that the one difference now is that I doubt the goal kicking is going to be as bad as it was in those 2 games, especially not on the high field. It tends to aid the kickers, whoever they are. That's the first thing. The other thing I want to ask Bernard, the one thing we always find funny, especially if you spend a lot of time on social media like I do, and I know you do as well, Bernard, is the hype that goes around. We still trying to understand this rivalry with Ireland that's building at the moment. And we I think we only getting to know now that it's not just a rivalry with Ireland, it's the inter-Ireland rivalry, because we often get told, no, it's the Dublin media that are pushing these narratives and certain podcast hosts up there. And then as opposed to the more traditional media, and when I speak to a lot of the guys like Murray and Rory and those guys, it seems a very different narrative to what you see on social media. So just around that, because I think a lot of people see that and sort of interpret it as that's Irish views.
Yeah, no, I think it's horrible, really, because I don't think it paints ourselves in a good light, because like we haven't got the trophies to be arrogant, and I actually think it's like Irish rugby's coming like. Okay, it's a long time since 1998, and Ireland were competitive in that match, Gavin. But I think there's 30 points difference. You know what I mean? Like the Springboks ripped us apart, really, but we made it a bit of a fight, and we used to finish bottom of the Five Nations. We used to win the wooden spoon, and Irish rugby's come a long way, and it's been well funded by the IRFU. And now we can believe that we can win Six Nations. Obviously, winning a Test series in New Zealand for a first time ever was massive. But don't forget, we only beat the All Blacks for the first time in Chicago, 7 or 8 years ago, first time ever. So, like, we are quite new to this, and some of the media they get carried away, I think. And it's a national radio station in particular, and one pundit who's probably the cause of half this. And he's not even Irish; he's Australian. But it sickens me when I hear people not being respectful, particularly media people. Like, you can't control social media and fans and such, but people are being paid to give what I see is a reasonable opinion, and just looking for clickbait or being controversial or being disrespectful, and even some of the narrative around the 7-1, the 6-1 and stuff, as in it should be banned. And like it's just I actually really admire, and I don't think the Springboks get enough credit for how creative they are, and how they think outside the box. Even taking the mark, against France in a Test match, that's never been done. That's never been done. So the Boks have this. They have obviously the cattle. They have the players. They have the muscle. but they also are smart now. They're smart, and we're like, I remember when I started coaching, and I was going to go to coach in France. I went to New Zealand for 4 or 5 weeks because I thought, I spent a week with the Crusaders, a week with the Chiefs, a week with the Highlanders, because that's where the game was. They were thinking ahead. Whereas I think now, if I was back again, I'd go to South Africa, because I do think you guys, in terms of intellectual property, and it comes, obviously from the top down. And the problems are your franchises can do what they want, but there is a lot of discussion, I believe, between the coaches and the national coaches and your pony system, etc. I think you guys have really created something which is very, very powerful, and that's respected by most rugby people in Ireland, I promise you. And we love, I played with CJ Van der Linde, I played with Ollie Leroux, RG Snyman, Damien Lande came to Munster, John Klein came to Munster, became an Irishman, and then went back. He's so respected in Munster. When Razzie and Jack were in Munster, I mean, the impact they had was massive. So even back to Alan Solomon's, coaching in Ulster, we've had a big tradition of South African players or coaches coming over here and integrating incredibly well. Ruan Pienaar was a legend in Ulster. So it's effectively a small group of media people who get carried away, and I don't know whether looking for clickbait or what their agenda is, but it paints us in a bad light, and it's unfortunate.
I was going to ask the other one. Maybe anybody can grab this one if they want. If you look at potential weaknesses in Ireland and in the Irish team, and there's not many, they're a very solid team all round. Just how much of a loss has Hugo Keenan and Jamison Gibson Park been in the terms of just matching the Springboks and just the way Ireland play?
Yeah,
Gibson
I think.
Sorry, I'll just say the Gibson Park in particular. Yeah. Sorry, you speak.
Sorry. Just before, Gibson Park is the key to Ireland. I mean, especially without Johnny Sexton, he has been the second best scrum half in the Northern Hemisphere, behind Antoine Dupont. He's probably the most important to how Ireland and Leinster play, because he's a link man. He creates space for others, whereas Dupont does that, and he does his own thing as well. He has magical individual moments, and then Hugo Keenan, he's not Willie Leroux. He's not a second playmaker as such, but he's so important to Ireland in terms of his aerial ability and his ability to cover the backfield. And we saw how the Bulls exposed that space in the backfield when he wasn't there a couple of weeks ago. He's got to play sevens, obviously. Those two are big losses for Ireland.
And just looking at, obviously we've spoken now about the changes in the Springbok team. I think the one thing, just Bernard, what you said a bit earlier about South Africans' influence in overseas, the one difference, I think, for me, and I know Gavin and Liam, you guys can weigh in here, is that in the past, and I think Jacques said it at one point as well, and there's so much talent coming through in South Africa's system that at times when you player picks up a problem or picks up an issue or doesn't quite fit in, there's always another guy coming through. So you just almost discard the play. And South Africa's done that. And what the pony system's done, and probably what the URC's done in a wider range, is that it's forced South African coaches to coach more. And we've often had the debate over the years between the three of us at times about why South African players tend to just look so much better when they go to a European club. We over here, and I'm not talking about the superstars, the shooting stars that always tend to do well. I'm talking about the guys like Uzair Kasim and players that are sort of fringe here that wouldn't be considered greats in South Africa, but when they go to a European club or URC club, they look 10 times better, and it comes down a lot of the times to coaching. So I think in terms of that, the URC's improved it for all of us. But back, I suppose I must go back to my point because I'm not really making a point yet. But just in terms of Saturday, that sort of IP and that sort of thing that Rossi's built up, you've said it's very envious at the moment. But Saturday you can only put 23 on the park or 15 on the park at any time. And at the end of the day, I suppose it comes down to the old thing in Test match rugby of, who makes the least mistakes and who cracks under the pressure.
It's a bit insane when you consider that if you look at the team South Africa picked against Ireland in Paris in the pool game last year, you've got Oxenchair in for Kitshoff, you've got Andre Pollard in for Lubbock, and then you've got Willie Leroux in for Damon Willemse at the back. Just the experience those two backliners bring is incredible if you compare it to the resources elsewhere. I mean, just in terms of game management, having Pollard back, having a guy like Willie Leroux back, there's no doubt this is a better Springbok team for winning a tight game than the one that took the field in Paris.
Well, add to that, Liam, it's just, I mean, if you think of just the team, and Ben was saying that demolished Leinster's pack over there, and I mean, there's only one of that pack that's basically or two if you count Markov and Stalin on the bench, but two members of the Bulls pack that's actually even in this 23. The rest of them can't even get close.
Yeah. I missed one other name. There's Jasper Wiese also started the game in Paris. Of course, he's not playing this Saturday. We've got Kwagga Smith in at number 8. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the Bok team that will take the field on Saturday will be far better equipped for the job than the one that ran out in Paris. And of course, as Gavin mentioned earlier, it's not as if that team played poorly. The execution let them down on the day. And they were very frustrated. But I think also both teams were frustrated in that game. I mean, Ireland certainly the attack didn't have it, the way they always have it. I mean, they, in terms of their creativity, the way they're able to penetrate, the ability to string together phases is one of their hallmarks, and they weren't able to do that in that game.
One player who was with the Bulls and who's going to be there again tomorrow, and I think on Saturday, and might play an important role, is actually Marco van Staden, because he did a very good job of blunting Josh van der Flier at in the Leinster game. And Kwagga, of course, you've just mentioned that Jasper Wiese was at number 8 there, so it's a different a slightly different balance to the starting loose trio as well with Kwagga there, because of course he's also a very good ball scavenger as well. There's just another thing I was just thinking when I was swapping over now. Something that Bernard said earlier about there's no reason why the Boks should be any less knackered than Ireland, which is basically what you were saying, because we're on the same season now. Yeah. But maybe this is a concern more for what comes after this for the Boks, because I mean we're going to a rugby championship after this, and I know that's got nothing to do with Saturday's game. But at some stage, I think that the fact that South African rugby is on a non-stop 12-month season is going to catch up with them. And I think that it's a good thing in a way that South Africa has so many players that are based in Japan playing on Saturday, because they have a less stressful season, less intense season. I imagine I've been to Japan for the World Cup, but I've never been to watch club rugby there. But it does, by all accounts, they get used much more sparingly in Japan than they do elsewhere. So that actually could be a big. You agree that could be a big factor in South Africa's favour on Saturday. Just the fact that they've got those guys who should be relatively fresh, who haven't been playing that much.
Yeah, I think Gavin, I think looking at your team, and I know speaking to Jacques about it, the spirit and the atmosphere and the culture in this Springbok squad is incredible. I mean, he was telling me. It's so strong. I was saying this to some of the Irish players about the fact it was like sometimes they let the players decide who starts, who finishes. That's out of our mind that would happen in Ireland, or even in the Northern Hemisphere or the Anglo-Saxon culture. But I think the fact that you have so many of these players who've had amazing memories together of obviously, turning South African rugby around in a short period before Japan, winning World Cups, but then they're not together like 24 hours a day for most of the year, which the Irish players effectively are. The Leinster players who play for Ireland are effectively together for 11 months of the year. And that can become sometimes a little bit boring. You look at the Barbarians and how players come together for a week and how enriching it is mentally, to be meeting new people. And I know you've got a settled team, but Faf coming back from Japan, Andre coming from Leicester, they're coming in with ideas, stories, ways to maybe do things a little bit differently, sharing all that together. I think that can, the mental fatigue can be as bad as the physical fatigue. And I do agree with you. Yeah, the Japanese season is obviously less intense, but I think the whole, how exciting it is to be a Springbok now, and the culture there, and these fellas who are all very close friends coming back together for these blocks to play for their international side, I think can help potentially keep things fresh.
I remember John Smith saying to me ahead of the 2009 Lion series that, because I asked him a question around the fatigue, because there had been a particularly sort of arduous Super Rugby season that year, although it's nothing in comparison to now, when it's almost like 12 months. And he spoke about like pulling on the Springbok jersey, particularly for a Lion series. He said the Lions would feel. Oh, I think my question might have been more directed to how the Lions would feel, because it's at the end of their season. The way I look at it now is that with South Africa now on the same sort of, well, we're now sort of on the Northern Hemisphere season. It actually sort of equals up the battle a bit more. Like when we went over there in November every year over to play in, well, whether it was Dublin or whether it was in London or at Murrayfield, we were always at a bit of a disadvantage because it was at the end of a long season. Now you go over there and you're sort of at the same stage of the season as your opponents. And likewise, when they come out here now, certainly for the locally based players who are playing URC, they're on the same timeline as their opponents as well, and their Northern Hemisphere opponents. So I think it's more of a sort of realistic matchup. As you say, if the Boks are knackered, or if Ireland are knackered, then the Boks have every reason to be as well. So it is more of a there's not one team that has a disadvantage. Like for instance, what I'm saying is that the All Blacks are hosting England on Saturday, and the All Blacks are 3 months into their season. England, I think, started this season when they started their World Cup camp, and I can't remember where that was, but it was 13 or 14 months ago. And with Eddie Jones, it probably wasn't much fun. So it's a long time.
Yeah, I was going to say, guys, I mean, I think we're going to probably talk about this still for hours, but I think we have to start wrapping up. Liam's going to rush off to the airport, so I think he's getting a bit frantic over here. So let's maybe just finish up with a prediction from everybody, just on score. You don't have to do a score if you want, but where the game will be won and lost, and what do you reckon the outcome will be come 7 o'clock or just after 7 o'clock on Saturday night?
Okay, well, I think it's going to be a reverse of the previous games between Ireland and South Africa, where Ireland have been sort of the more efficient team and have taken their chances better. I think that Saturday isn't going to be the one-sided game that some people might be predicting, but I think that South Africa are going to be more clinical and actually going to win it because they're more clinical and they do kick their goals and they do take their chances like they haven't before. I wouldn't want to predict a score, but I think it might be about 8. Well, I'm going to. Let's say 8 points.
I'm going to go a little bolder. I agree with you. I think the Boks will be a little bit more clinical, and the flags will be raised a little bit more often than we've seen in recent games against most opposition, actually. So I'm going to go for something like 29-19.
Yeah, I think South Africa by 10. South Africa by 10. I think our best chance of winning is the second test. If we're to win one, I think this is going to be incredibly difficult. And yeah, I agree. I think that the Boks will be more efficient. Kicking our goals would have beat us in the World Cup, and with a Pollard there, you'd have to reckon they will kick from long range as well. I think we'll struggle to win a territorial battle. Our line out there's big pressure on our line out to deliver. We got snuffed out there, and that's such a big part of how Ireland play. So yeah, I think South Africa by 10, and hopefully still survive intact to be able to go to the second test in Durban with a chance.
Yeah, my take is probably be very much like that Leinster game. It's going to be still tense, even into those last minutes, but I reckon probably South Africa will come out 6 points by me, and I hopefully it's a great game. And we talk about rugby afterwards and not all sorts of other stuff. That would be great for me. But guys, thanks for joining us. And as I say, we can do this again, hopefully after the first test. Yeah. Yeah, and it was great chatting to you all, and yeah, enjoy the game.
Thanks, guys.
Take it easy. Enjoy the game.
Yeah.
Bye.
See you at Loftus.
Bye.
Yes, guys. So, Liam, there's not much left to do but wait for the game. there's a lot of rugby this weekend. England are playing New Zealand. Wales are playing Australia. Scotland are somewhere in Canada, I think. So there's quite a bit of rugby going on this weekend. France and Argentina. Although, I mean, I think the two big ones there is to see what Scott Robertson does with his first squad against an England team who always have hype around them and always have opinions around them. So that's going to be an epic one to start off Saturday morning. I still see New Zealand winning that one quite comfortably, but it's going to be an interesting one to watch. And then two sides in Brisbane who or are they playing in Perth? I'm not sure, but Australia and Wales. Two sides who certainly have got a lot to make up for in the international stage. Both had reasonably disappointing World Cup experiences, or Wales did a bit better, but certainly are on a renewal arc. And it's going to be a fascinating one just to watch what happens to Australian rugby, first of all, and after the Box demolished Wales a couple of weeks ago, just what Wales can offer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fascinating thing will be in that series between New Zealand and England would be the way Scott Robertson has sort of embarked on this new path with the All Blacks. We will get a proper glimpse into that. Obviously, they will be far from where he wants them to be, but at least we'll have an early indication of what the way he's going to set out his stall. I think for England, I think opinion is still very much split on Steve Borthwick as to whether he's the guy to take them forward. As for Australia against Wales, I think the Aussies will feel that they owe Wales one after last year's World Cup. And there again, new coach coming in, and we'll have a proper idea of what Joe Schmidt will bring to the Wallaby lineup.
And it can be interesting because Joe Schmidt comes across as an extremely pragmatic, sort of structured type coach. And Wallaby rugby has always sort of prided itself at trying to be this free-flowing, expansive type game to compete with league and all the other sports that are above it in Australia. So, and they quite often criticize South Africa about the type of rugby South Africa played. So will Joe go the pragmatic route, or will he actually spread his wings? That's going to be also quite interesting. But I mean, we'll deal all with that next week when we have the fallout, and we'll invite some of our guests back and hopefully just have a good old chat about what happened this weekend. There's going to be enough to talk about. But for now, I think that's it from us. Unless you have anything to say last before we go there.
No, I don't. I'm just gripped by all this anticipation, Brendan. I'm almost wishing the moment's over.
Yeah, it was that weird one, the first test of the year. You can't wait for it to happen, but you're also not quite sure what's going to happen. So I think we'll have a much better sort of aspect, look at where teams are after the first weekend. Of course, it's the first weekend of a long international season, so lots to ponder, lots to talk about next week. But yeah, for now, we are waiting for the unfinished business at Loftus. We'll both be there. We'll be watching, and we'll be back here next week. Thanks for listening, and chat to you then.
Speak to you then.
Thanks for listening, and a reminder, you can find all the To The Last Drop podcasts on the Brendan Nell YouTube channel, iono.fm, Spotify, Player.fm, Pocket Casts, Google Podcasts, and iTunes, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.